Times now. Please can you tell us what do you think from your perspective is going to happen on Tuesday night?
Tuesday night the government's going to lose. What's going to happen? I think it's unlikely the Conservative Party will split sufficiently to get a vote of no confidence through.
Content over everything!
Although Corbyn's going to move one by the sound of it.
I think it's a foolish move he's doing.
I don't think it's a foolish move. I mean, and it's part of. You see, Corbyn's tried to abide by conference policy, despite what many on the right wing of the Labour Party and the soft left of the Labour Party would like.
Correct.
And he's come under a lot of pressure from them to abandon calling for a general election and to call for a so-called people's vote instead. I don't think the idea of this so-called people's vote is the right demand to make, because it relives the whole process again without resolving it. I think the resolution to the issue of the constitutional position of Britain, which is what is at stake, is to call what we could call a constitutional assembly or a constitutional convention. That means an elected body should be created, elected by the people, recallable to the people, to draw up a constitution for what Britain is and what Britain should be in the future.
How long is that going to take?
I don't mind how long it takes. It's taken 2 years to cobble together a deal that nobody's going to accept.
Yeah.
Everybody in Britain is irritated and agitated about the question. There's no resolution coming from the present parliamentary constellation. Therefore, when you have utter gridlock in a nation, and better said than that, between the four parts of the nation of Britain, because both Northern Ireland and Scotland voted to remain, Wales and England voted to leave. Therefore, you have a fundamental constitutional issue at stake. And then the relationship between the country, which has been a member of the European Union for 40 years, and the other countries of Europe is also at stake. And there, of course you can. And therefore, a constitutional convention and a constitutional assembly is the only mechanism to resolve the position in Britain at the present time, other than a general election.
How do we get the ball rolling on that?
Sorry?
How do we get the ball rolling on that?
Well, the problem is, I'm advocating this, and I know I'm a voice in the wilderness about this question. Having said that, I did interview Jeremy Corbyn in 2015 when he first stood for leader of the Labour Party, and he supported the idea at that time, which I raised with him then, and he said, yes, we should call a constitutional convention. I think the issue has been, he has been too willing to capitulate to the right wing of the Labour Party. I think internally, inside the Labour Party, we really do need to start acting to purge these people out of the positions of members of Parliament who have been sabotaging the activity of the left in the party right from the day that Jeremy Corbyn got elected. And to be honest with you, that is the reason why Corbyn presently appears to be relatively lacklustre, is because each time he's been attacked by the right wing in the Labour Party, he has been forced into a position of giving ground on one issue after another issue, fearing that the Labour Party might split and that might undermine the position in a general election.
Tiny question for him.
Jeremy Corbyn, before the Brexit vote took place, I can send you the YouTube video and the interview which I did with him in Clissold Park, where I asked this question, and he clearly stated we should call a constitutional convention in advance of a general election.
But now we're talking about now.
Yes, in opposition.
He's in favour of Brexit.
He's not in favour of Brexit. There was a vote taken by the people in Britain to leave the European Union. He is merely saying that he respects that vote that they took. That's all.
So why would he agree to
That doesn't mean he's in favour of Brexit. He voted and campaigned to remain in the European Union.
So why would he agree to a constitutional convention? Why would he want a constitutional convention?
Because the position at the moment is that Britain, the people of Britain and the politics of Britain are totally frozen and stuck. And many people are talking about all sorts of wild scenarios. A massive rise of the far right. Some people raised the idea last week with me of a civil war, which was repeated by some people who are members of Parliament. I don't think that's where we're going. But I do think some sort of resolution needs to be made. I think the most likely scenario now is that there will be a delay made by Parliament to the decision about what happens, whether that be 6 months or 1 year. And in that time, it is perfectly possible to call a constitutional convention elected by the people which decides on a constitution of Britain. If that constitution of Britain, which in my opinion, the population of Britain, whether Leave voters or Remain voters, I believe if you actually ask them what should go in a constitution for the future of this country, I think they will come up with perfectly sensible, rational and acceptable ideas.
Like what? Like what?
The fact that some people already
Like, for example, I don't believe the population think that the railways should be private. I don't believe the population think that the supply of electricity and gas should be private. I don't believe the population think that students to pay for university. I don't believe the population think we should be increasing the age of retirement rather than reducing the age of retirement.
So how would you
I think
pay
there
for
are
all this?
fundamental rights
How would you
and
pay for all the
concepts.
living?
What do you say to the fact
The
If it was
gentleman,
not-
here,
if it
the
was
gentleman
not
here
private-
asked me,
Yeah.
how would you pay for all of this?
Yes, sir.
The question is, what does the population want? That's one question. And that deals both with the constitutional issues of what Britain is as a nation, and then what do they want enshrined in a constitutional framework as to how they see their country. Now, some of those things they want will self-evidently be aspirations. Some of them will be enshrined as fundamental laws that the population say, we believe this is the framework and only a referendum of, for example, 60% would be able to overturn it. So a constitutional convention will draw up rights and responsibilities, ideas about how society should be structured, and then a referendum could ratify a constitution, and then that constitution can be taken both to the people of, it will be taken by the people of Britain, and also presented to other countries as a model of what type of society you can have. When the United States created their constitution, it became a clarion call for people all around the world to say, that is the type of society we would like to see.
So you're saying the people who want a socialist government?
Britain already
Britain
has
doesn't have a
Yes,
constitution,
it does.
which is
Some
what?
people would argue Magna Carta of 1215, Bill of Rights of 1697, Behaviour's Corpus Act, all of those.
Okay. There are people in Britain who argue that Britain has some form of constitution connected to ancient Runnymede discussions and things like that. There's some snippet of validity to that, but not much. Don't forget, I mean, there was a... Who did I see this guy on TV just this morning? I can't remember who it was, I'm really sorry. It was a Tory councillor somewhere. They were discussing with him on television this morning. And he said, oh, Britain is the oldest democracy in the world. Apparently the oldest democracy in the world. He said, we've had democracy, he says, for 1,000 years, which corresponds with the type of argument you just put to me. In fact, up until 1867, only a tiny percentage, about 5 or 6% of the population had the right to vote. Only those with property had the right to vote, even in 1867. Only in 1928, 90 years ago, only then did we get the right to vote for men and women. And even then, Oxford and Cambridge students had 2 votes. So the idea that we have some ancient democratic constitution is a lie. What we do have, however, is enshrined power, established over 1,000 years, maintained by the structure of power and by Parliament, the House of Lords, the monarchy, and all the deference that follows from that towards landowners and the wealthy and powerful. We have a deference to them which is unjustified and which allows them to use ancient precedents and ancient laws and ancient institutions and so-called traditions to hoodwink the population into thinking they live into the oldest democracy where they control politics. They don't control politics, they don't control economics, and they don't control the structure of power.
And additionally, when you have the Oxford students, it's disproportionately represented from independent sector, 40%, when less than 7% of the population are privately educated. When it gets to the institutions, which should be our institutions, our universities, the people, they make up 40%.
It is perfectly.
Absolutely disgusting.
There are some people at Speaker's Corner.
It needs to be equal for all. Independent schools should be either
they can
open to
go,
all or
why not?
abolished.
Everyone
It's
have-
segregation.
Yes.
There are some people at Speaker's Corner propagating this idea that there's some sort of genetic constitution to the superiority of the elite. In other words, those who are at the top have some superior genetic disposition. Their intelligence is reflected in the position they have, and that generally there's some correlation between those at the top and those with high IQs and pure genetic disposition, and that the rest of us somehow are down there with a lower genetic order. I'll take you one second, I'll take you right next. Now, the truth of the matter is, Oxford and Cambridge, as institutions of the elite, connected in with the old public school ties and networks, still play a very important role in allocating positions for the elite to reproduce themselves and their structure and organisation and hierarchy of power in society. It's a process of self-reproduction. Now, it's self-evident as well that if you have a lot of money, a lot of power and a lot of connections, which many of these people do, then of course the reproduction process is so much easier. How difficult, of course, is it for someone from, one of the poorer estates in Bristol to go to one of the better universities and then pass amongst their peers at the same level, and then to enter into the network of associations which these people have connected to the old elites. And it's self-evidently much more difficult. Now, that's not to moan and groan about the condition of those who are at the bottom, many of whom are able to work their way up by hard graft and study and so on. It is, however, to illustrate the tendential relationship between those at the top of power and those institutions that maintain power, whether it be the judiciary, the army, the police, the university elites, the administrative structure, the corporate structure, the managerial structure, the governmental structure. All of these institutional frameworks reproduce the existing society. And because there hasn't been a revolution in Britain since the 1640s, that reproduction process had never been smashed. And in some countries, like America, it was smashed. And so you have illustrations of the ways in which different societies have produced different types of class structure, different appearances to them. So Britain's capitalist class structure has a combination between genuine capitalist entrepreneurs who work their way up, like this gentleman here, and, well, you happen to be there at that moment, and those who come from that other background, the history of colonialism, imperialism, of lords and ladies and monarchies and so on, who reproduce their kind and reproduce the power associated with their kind. The problem lies in this, is that even though you can democratize elements of this power, because it is so deeply ingrained in British society, it will probably require such a fundamental transformation in the balance of social power to change this, that it may well entail some kind of revolutionary upheaval in order to achieve this. And an illustration of that is the fact that somebody whose ideas are actually very close to mine, Jeremy Corbyn, when he was elected leader of the Labour Party, all hell has broken out, not only inside the Labour Party, but also external to the Labour Party to try to prevent him from being able to carry out policies that he himself believes in. And everything's been done, from the anti-Semitism smears to the terrorism smears to the, God knows what. Oh, his brother been dragged into it, family been dragged into it, lies and slanders, one after another, and an orchestrated campaign, not only by the mass media and the establishment, but also by the right wing of the Labour Party, who've been consistently seeking to sabotage. One thing that may well happen in the next few weeks, I don't know, but it may well happen, is that if Jeremy Corbyn was able to secure the likelihood of a general election, or if there was a general election, shortly after this, Jeremy Corbyn will be sabotaged. Sabotaged from within his own party, by his own MPs. We know this is how they work. They're more interested in removing Corbyn than they are in getting a Labour government. That's why they've been saying, contrary to party policy, that they want people's vote, people's vote, people's votes. That's why they're going on about it. Not because it will achieve the objective of a Labour government, but because it will undermine Jeremy Corbyn. Sorry, you've been waiting a long time.
I have a couple of reservations to make. Post Second World War, we are passing through the most important time of the new world order, which is emerging in the world. And I believe the British has introduced the oldest, finest principles of governing the people. Governing the people through the will of the people. And I am not able to see, let me make my observation, I'm not able to see any better system than the British democracy introduced in the world. While there was 1,000 years rule, of monarchs in India, in Arab Peninsula, and in European Union as well. So with this introduction of the finest principles, the world benefited from it. My observation is, at this very important time of the history, when the world is re-emerging and reshaping, let me make my point. I'm so disappointed to see that Britain has failed, the British Parliament, the British politicians have failed to recognize their role. What is happening against them? They're fighting on very tiny issues. Let me make my point. I have been listening to you very, very long.
Yeah, but one thing to you.
Let me make first my point. At this time, you people are not able to see what is being conspirated against you. What is happening? Some powers of the world want you out of the EU. Another power of the world want you to come out of the EU because of their own reasons. The Russians want you to leave EU so they can be friends with the European Union. The Trump want you to come out of the EU so he can step to the EU. What happened to you people? You are not able to recognize your role. The world is looking at you. EU is looking at you, and you are involved in such tiny issues. What happened to you
talking
people?
to me as if I represent Britain.
Yes, that's my point. You people are fighting.
Got that wrong.
The German Corbyn, well, he will be sabotaged. He should be sabotaged because he's not able to understand the will of the people. He is representing the largest political party of this country. He's not able to identify the pulse of the people. The majority of the people, they want to remain in EU. They want independence. They want their supremacy. They want their history. They want their education. You people have given the best course to the world.
I told you you're annoying people here. So it's not fault.
But India didn't
I'm hardly annoyed.
under the empire.
I think you have a little bit of
They
a...
got democracy.
Let him answer.
I think you've got a little bit of a starry-eyed view of Britain's historical background.
Yes.
Just a little.
Go
Just
for
a
it.
little. Now, I believe it was 1700. I'm guessing that you're from Indian subcontinent. In 1700, India was wealthier than Britain. India was wealthier than Britain. In 1820, China was the wealthiest country in the world. It was wealthier than India. But within 100 years, India had been dragged backwards in the scale of development. and had been dragged by the British.
Not
Without the right to
the
vote granted to the
people were
Indians.
never rich.
Without,
People were never rich.
hang on, you
Let him
spoke, I'm
finish.
trying to reply. Without the right to vote granted to the Indians. In fact, they ruled over India with an iron fist. 1850s.
Crippling taxes.
There's a statue in Trafalgar Square, General Havelock, 1857, a monument to the crushing of the Indian uprising. Still on Trafalgar Square now.
It was their right. They were powerful.
1857.
Every powerful has the right.
1857.
They made
After
hospitals.
10 million
they made
people were
universities.
starved to death in India.
He's a brown sob.
In 1943,
they built-
1943, 3 million Indians in West Bengal
They built
were starved to
universities.
death
They built
under the
hospitals.
British.
They introduced railway.
Now there are people
Everything they introduced.
There are people who believe, as you do, that the British, you look at the good things Britain brought to India, and you see those primarily,
we are diverting from
and you
the-
don't see.
We are diverting from
You
the.
don't. No, we're not diverting from the subject.
You come back to the Brexit.
Because you are saying to
Why are you people not able to
Brexit
identify
was the
your
thing
role?
you came on to secondary. You started out with something else.
The Putin wants you
You
out of the
started
EU.
out with
What will
arguing
you do? You have
that
been always
Britain-
making the rules. You will be rule takers now.
Started out by arguing
German Corbyn,
that
what
Britain
did
had established over the long term, over 1,000 years, a system that should be emulated by others around the world. Therefore, I tried to start to answer your question or your comments with a comment in relation to that starting foundation, your analytical framework with which you analysed and viewed British democratic tradition. That is what I wished initially, at least to counterpose to the circumstances relating to your own historical background. Second, in relation to the Brexit vote, the truth of the matter is, we are in the situation we're in. And the most, well, in my opinion, it's a relatively peripheral question.
Because you're a politician.
It's not a politician. In my opinion, leaving or remaining in the European Union is a relatively peripheral question. The Great Recession, starting in 2008, has had a far bigger impact on the lives of the people of Britain than Brexit ever will, even if we crashed out of the European Union tomorrow. It will not affect people as much as the Great Recession of 2008. Will not. The total impact estimated on the British economy over the next 20 years or 15
you are
years,
making a-
about 10% decline in economic growth.
You are making misleading
But the
statements
decline
based
since
on
the
no
Great
evidence.
Recession would be 40%. 40%
This is misleading
because of the Great
statement based
Recession.
on no evidence.
And
Britain
therefore-
has yet to see. Britain has yet to see the downfall
who
of.
were tied into the euro.
Yeah, but we're not
Since
tied
the
into the euro.
2008
We're
crash.
not tied into the euro.
Yeah, but it seems that that's what they wanted
Yes.
to drag us into initially. But back then, we had the wherewithal to stay out of the euro.
People like George
But you know,
Soros.
this is all the European project. It is a project of globalism.
We still
And
experience
what we see in
my
Russia
friend, I
is
do
this
object.
fantastic
I do object.
Riots against it in
That
France.
2000
I do
We're
object.
seeing
That
riots
one minute,
against
you
the
did have a
Bank of
point.
France, riots against the Rothschild Bank in France. We're seeing riots against all of this globalist crap. Against
I do not believe-
immigration.
I do not
against
believe
all of this
the
disgusting
term globalist
crap.
is a very precise
100%.
term. What we're witnessing is the opposite of so-called globalist agendas. What has happened since 2008, which is not because of some planners and thinkers like your conspiratorial mind is capable of adapting to. It's not Rothschild
central
who runs
bankers.
the world.
Yes, it is.
Despite listening to the radio on the way here and the BBC Radio 4, they said, and the last item of the news they said is, the racehorse owner, Lady Rothschild, died today. And of course this man then thinks, oh, the globalists, they're controlling the radio.
No, I don't watch
Now,
the
the
radio.
truth of the matter is,
He's talking about the money supply.
and when the economy
You
of
need to allow
capitalism
cross-arguments
is
as well.
expanding,
You just don't
there is
have to
inevitably a process of increasing the parameters of economic integration. When the economy is no longer expanding at the same rate, then of course the governments or politicians will emerge and will gain popularity by attacking others inside their nations and other nations other than their own nation.
Generally,
and
if you
inside
don't have
their own
central
nation,
banking,
nationalities
you have a normal
they don't
economy.
like within that nation.
Let me
That is why the process of European integration, that this sort of Brexiteer numbskull believes is the dominant trend.
Okay,
is
so you're whipping up the inside.
Actually,
you
what's
sound
happening?
like a normal leftist.
What's
on that
happening
basis.
is that one,
Why don't we just start
so-called
calling each other
globalist
a Nazi?
operation.
That sounds like a great
the
start.
so-called globalist operation in Europe is not a globalist operation.
Yes, it is.
It is a German-French capitalist operation. The German and French capitalists dominate the European Union. The idea that some globalist agenda, whereby Lithuania has equal power with Germany,
that's not the idea.
as is written formally in the European constitutional framework, is rubbish. The idea
it's not
Estonia has equal power with Germany is utter and complete rubbish.
No, the
idea
idea
Greece
is that you
has
see
the same power as
identity
Germany
politics
is
constantly
utter and complete
on the BBC.
rubbish.
You see it right across
But in
the
order for
mainstream
this
media.
gentleman,
you see constant
in
promotion
order for this gentleman
of the EU
to argue,
right across the mainstream media in all of the
my friend,
countries.
ask
you
yourself
see constant promotion
What
of
is the
mass
consequence?
uncontrolled
What is the
immigration
consequence?
on the media all the time. So
what
you
is the
see
consequence?
constant globalism and constant promotion
You
of
imagine
all of
you
its
see that.
agendas.
You
No,
imagine
that's
you
exactly
see that.
what you say.
But ask
It is
yourself
the
this.
most dominant
What is
political
happening?
force
What
in the world today.
What
It's
is
globalism.
no, on the contrary?
You see
it is
constant
the breakdown
attacks on
of
Donald
international
Trump
organisations.
and on every other
It is the breakdown
nationalist
of the European
politician
Union
across the
and
world.
it is also,
you continually
oh,
see
shut up
all
for a
of
second.
this
No!
demonisation of nationalists by disgusting globalists,
You should take
by
this one back.
people, the globalists who want to enslave all
because
of
he's not
mankind,
talking
who want to
to
destroy
the audience here or to me.
cultures across
He's
the
trying
world.
to show off to his YouTube fans what
Yeah.
city can talk.
He has every right to
He's
do
not
it.
engaging in the debate.
I don't generally listen to leftists too much.
Why don't you
because-
go over there and just talk to yourself in front of the screen?
Well, I mean, I don't
But that's
really
what
see
you're
how
doing.
you're any
Let's
different.
turn
to be
the
honest.
intelligent
I'm
discussion.
answering
You're
the
a typical
question
leftist. You do
make.
exactly the same.
I'm
you just
answering
don't like
exactly
it when
what
I
you
use
said.
your
I'm
tactic
answering what you
against
said.
you.
No, there's no
you're
tactic.
like Anne Soubry,
I'm
aren't
answering
you? You know
what you said.
when she calls a bunch
relax.
of populist Nazis,
You are
know,
not
she,
answering
that's okay.
anything
When
I
they
said
call her
or
a Nazi,
communicating with me.
you don't like
You're
it.
talking to your
You're
YouTube
just some
channel.
idiot
That's
who
it.
watches the BBC,
Not interested.
who watches the fake
Is anybody
news,
interested
and
in what he's
have
discussing?
no intellectual
Get
credibility.
You get a video round
Yeah.
quickly. Anybody interested in what he's saying? Just do a quick turn. Did you get that?
Hey?
Did you get that?
I was just
And I don't even
whipping you
mind
up.
you saying stuff. It's just the fact of the matter is, you are not interested in engaging in debate. That's all.
I engage
I don't
in
mind
debate
anybody
with
joining in,
intelligent
but
people.
you're not interested.
But what, you're like a commie, aren't you? So you're a
Where was I
dumbass.
at? I was at this, answering the gentleman's question. I was explaining.
Why he's a commie?
Let him answer.
The global process of integration stopped in 2008. Funny correspondence. Then the process of political movement to the right began, which ended up with the Brexit vote and ended up with the beginnings of the end of the European Union and ended up with the economic crisis in many parts of the European Union and ended up with Donald Trump elected in the United States and Bolsonaro elected in Brazil. Now, these facts that led to the gradual breakdown and shift to the right. How are you, my friend? Long time no see. Your health all right?
Oh, how are you? Long time no
But you're
see.
here.
How many years?
So,
You okay, brother?
the problem you've got is this. Not only the so-called globalist European Union, the so-called globalist world agenda, which you seem to imagine you've sucked out of some Illuminati book
No,
or from
I didn't.
David Icke's
No.
butthole.
No, I didn't. No.
The truth of the matter is,
when you look at
the
G.
problem
Edward
you've got is
Griffin,
this.
if you want some actual
problem you have
research
is
on the
this.
topic, then look at
Just
G. Edward
listen to
Griffin.
this one answer. The problem you have is this.
Or Jekyll Island.
The consequence of the Brexit vote looks like the most likely consequence will be the breakup of Britain. The breakup of Britain. The reason they're screaming about the so-called backstop is because the Tory government went into an alliance to hold themselves in power with Arlene Foster and the DUP. They are as close as you can get in Britain to the Islamic State fundamentalists.
That's absolute rubbish.
They believe they're the
You're
chosen
just
people.
ridiculous leftists.
They believe they're the
who likes to
chosen
make
people.
ridiculous claims like that.
They believe they are the
Probably start
chosen
going on about
people,
the far right
and they
now.
believe that terror is
Yeah.
a viable and acceptable mechanism of bringing about the maintenance of their separation
typical
from the rest
lefty.
of Ireland.
Yeah.
That Arlene Foster, a couple of weeks before, she entered the government coalition, she had been meeting with leading terrorists in Northern Ireland, active present prescribed terrorist groups. Take a look on the internet. In the weeks before the last election, the IRA is long dead, my friend. Whereas the Protestant allies, they are still active terrorists prescribed by the British government.
It's always a bunch of lies.
So do a bit of study about it. Check on the internet.
I have a question for you, sir. What is wrong with the dismantle? After 2008, I agree with everything you
I have
said.
said, I am in favour to try and damage limitation, or have a policy of damage limitation. I am in favour of the election of a constituent assembly or a constituent convention which will decide the fate of Britain, of the nations within Britain, and what type of constitution we would like to have. Because the people, if they're told they're going to have a people's vote, it's meaningless, a people's vote. It gives people no more say than they had in the referendum. Whereas people want to have a say. People have studied what happened in the
Why
since
can't we
Brexit.
have a people's
People
vote?
know what the argument is to remain, what the argument is to leave. They want more than simply a binary choice about yes, leave or stay, or deal or no deal. They want to be able to participate themselves in deciding the fate of their country. They don't want to turn against each other simply because of some propaganda that has been made for 25 years by Nigel Farage. And that's what's going on. Everyone is debating what Nigel Farage advocated for 25 years.
But my question
What
is deeper.
friggin' EU
My
army?
question, Heiko, is deeper.
The one
What
they're
is
trying to
wrong-
build now.
What is wrong
They
with
can
the
try all they like.
But what is wrong
They can
with the
try all they like.
dismantling of the international order? What is wrong?
I've got
with
nothing against the dismantling or the creation of the existing international order.
Okay, good. So
I
you
am
get-
not conscious of what this gentleman's pea-sized brain would like to argue. I have
Oh,
never
all right.
advocated
That
the
sounds like
globalism
another-
that he likes to
another
project onto
insult,
me.
isn't it?
Have I? But you've been coming down here, you've been videoing,
Yeah.
you've been watching the videos, but
Right.
each time you come back with the same shit.
Well, I mean, I've never heard an
As if I
original
said-
argument from
Sorry?
a leftist in my entire life.
Well,
So
good for you.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of what I come down here with the same shit, I talk about globalism.
So I ask you this.
which is
I
the
ask
main
you this.
political
I ask you
force
this.
in the
I
world
ask you
today.
this. Quickly.
That's why it's important
Quickly,
to
just one
talk about.
question.
Go on.
Did you hear someone else advocating a constitutional assembly?
No, actually, that's
Oh, you
that's
never
a
heard
new
an
one.
original argument from a lefty?
Well, I wouldn't say it's an original argument. I don't
you've
really
never heard
know
it
your
before from a
argument left. Yeah, I don't
It's
really
not an
know
original
it.
argument then. Who else is advocating you know of?
Well, I'd like to hear more about this, and I haven't
Thank you,
really
I'm
taken
glad
it
you-
in.
That's what I'm
So
speaking
why
about.
don't we just do
That's what I'm
that?
speaking about.
So you're not going to heckle anymore. You're going to
So rather than leave
Well,
the
they
European
were heckling
Union,
him just now, and then he
Go
started
crashing
insulting
out,
me.
or
That's why I
adopting
started
a deal,
heckling you,
or
actually.
calling a new referendum,
It's because he started insulting
we should
me.
call, in my opinion, for the election of a constituent assembly which decides the fate of the country. And the
actually,
people
it
are
sounds like a
elected,
shit
I believe,
idea, to
one,
be honest.
there should be electronic
We should just
voting.
get on with Brexit now.
Two,
We already decided.
everyone over the 18 over the age of
2016,
18 should be able to
17.4
vote.
million people.
3, they should be able to recall those that they elected. And those are the, I think probably should be proportional representation. The members, the people elected should be able to make suggestions about what should happen, and then people should be able to vote on the suggestions.
You sound like a Liberal Democrat now. What happened?
That is,
Why can't we have a people's
on the
vote?
contrary, in case you haven't studied these questions
Why can't we
properly,
have a people's vote? What type of...
after the Russian Revolution, or better said, during the Russian Revolution, the first Russian Revolution, Lenin and Trotsky and others advocated constituent assembly. Because it is the fulfillment of bourgeois democratic demands. It's a genuine capitalist democracy. That's why America had a constituent assembly.
Why can't we have a people...
So I'm saying to you, here you have a chance to have a genuine capitalist democratic institution elected by the people to decide the constitution of the country. Because the present political structure is incapable of resolving the problems.
Why can't we have a people's vote on whether we should have a people's vote?
That's a good question. And a people's vote after that to decide whether the vote was right.
Shouldn't, and some are-
I agree. I am not in favour of the idea of a so-called people's vote. Because who decides what in it? A couple of members of parliament.
They decide.
You're not deciding what's going in it. There's no democratic discussion about what should be in that vote. Therefore, it's not a democratic vote. It's a vote decided perhaps by an agreement between a few members of parliament as to what should be on the ballot.
And why? And what's going to happen?
You can't just do it on a whim.
And then like the EU is going to have us join the euro, join the EU.
Well, I've said I'm not in favour of the referendum.
Should we then have would we be okay to have a second referendum if that was the case?
As I said, I'm not in favour of the first referendum. I'm not in favour of another referendum. I'm not. I'm in favour of a constitutional assembly, an assembly of the people to decide the fate of the country.
And that's more democratic.
Based on
I believe that,
proportional
and then you can have a referendum to decide: do we agree with this constitution or not?
Yeah, that's good.
That's how.
Is that
that's
just
how
a general change to the government?
Historically, resolve the question of an inability to function, and that's what we have. Everybody's
is
at
this
each
just
other's
one
throats,
decision, or
and
is
no
this
answers forthcoming.
Is this a
from
new
politics as it
government
stands.
suggestion? Is this just for one decision, or is this a new government?
For a constitution, what
right.
the country is.
Okay, right. I mean, if you're looking at new types of government, I would suggest that you have smaller governments and eventually libertarianism.
Within the Constitutional Assembly,
Yeah.
you would be able to put forward what ideas you want, and people can discuss them.
What they should do, yeah, they can have a second vote on Brexit, yeah? But it doesn't mean that Brexit's not going to happen. What they could do is then vote in Jeremy Corbyn, and he can do the negotiations on how the UK could stay in the EU. But the negotiations...
As a Brexiteer, that sounds like a terrible idea.
I know, you would accept, but he can do a sort of better negotiation than this Tory government.
They want to stay in the EU.
No. Jeremy Corbyn isn't very pro-EU. He isn't very pro-EU.
No, Theresa May is.
I agree.
To be honest, Corbyn will stay in.
But something that they could do to protect British workers' rights, so that companies employ people for Britain first, not from other countries.
So why can't we do that without the EU?
I agree.
Because the government has no plan. You can't do stuff without the government.
Corbyn is in a luxurious position of being the opposition leader because he has freedom to say what he wants without being under the spotlight all the time and having to do what his paymasters suggest.
Can I ask you a question? Yeah? Does the current government have a plan for Brexit?
They don't want to fulfil Brexit.
So why don't we vote in the opposition who might have a better plan? That might
They
work
want
for
to stay in the EU.
I'm in favour of the election of a Labour government, but I'm not going to go along with a line being peddled by the leadership of the party at the moment that somehow Jeremy Corbyn can negotiate a better deal. I don't believe that is the case. I don't believe that is factual. The only way you're actually going to get a transformation in society is to transform the society, in other words, alter the entire balance of power.
I mean,
and I am in favour to answer the
it's
question
the obvious
about
deal.
how I believe the relationship to Europe should be. I am in favour of a constitutional convention, constitutional assembly in Britain, with a new structure of power in our society. And I would advocate that whatever type of structure of power we establish, what rules, regulations and structures of the nation we establish, should be universalist. So just the same as when the American Constitution was established, it helped provoke revolutions around the world, like the French Revolution. So too, if we create a new constitution for Britain, It should be a revolutionary constitution which will appeal to the people of Greece, of Spain, of Italy, of Lithuania, of Latvia, and yes, of Germany and France, to create a new balance of power in society between the people and power, between the people and economy, between finance and society, so that we create a society not run by big banks and big businesses, but run by the people, for the people. Real power to the people over the economy and society.
I mean, every politician has been saying that for the last 500 years.
No, that's not
The evidence is there that every single country in Europe is in crisis. Every country in Europe. The French are facing mass street upheavals. The Germans are facing far-right resurgence. The Austrians have elected the far-right already.
Far-right, really correct.
Are eating out of rubbish bins in the south of Spain. In Greece, the people have been living in penury and poverty for nearly 10 years now. In Lithuania and Latvia, the
central banking and being pegged into the euro
has collapsed.
That's
in
why
Poland,
the currencies
the
have
far
failed.
right or right-wing government is in power, and the dictatorial government is in power in Hungary. So what rubbish about the European globalism? There is no European
central
Union.
Banking
Europe
being
is on
pegged
the edge
into
of
the
collapse.
euro.
And the issues-
That's what caused the financial
the
collapse
issues
of
about
all
workers'
of these
rights.
countries.
No. What caused the financial collapse is the fact that German banks and French banks controlled the finance, and Germany
And everyone was
exports
pegged into the euro.
45% of its economy is based on export. 50% of the German economy based on exports. 45% of them go to the European Union.
They had a better credit rating.
So they pay
all
the
of the
Spanish.
other countries
they
had a good credit
transferred
rating.
money to the Spanish, the Italians, and the Greeks to buy their goods. And of course, that's what they seek to maintain. Europe is not a globalist campaign.
No, and it was
Europe is a
central
German-French alliance controlling the European Union.
and also by the mercantile banks, because they also engage in their own form
you
of
and your
central
Brexit
banking.
fans, what's going on with that? According to the latest studies, something like 800 billion has left Britain already from the financial sector. And it's estimated that the finance sector that you great Brits think are so great and so nationalist and so
I hate the
finance sector. More than
I want Bitcoin, to be honest.
It's estimated that 50 to 65% of the service sector of Britain tied to the European Union will collapse.
I want the gold standard or Bitcoin.
So the idea
I want to move away
beneficial
from all
to your
ridiculous
Little England
credit-based finance systems.
Who would create a constitution? Which
Constitution
No
created
more
by the
fiat money, real money.
at the table to write that out?
You elect representatives.
So you're saying the
and my
Root
belief
people
on a
control the
proportional
money supply.
representation basis. Those
No
people
more
put
fraud
forward
by
suggestions,
governments or by
different
mercantile
suggestions.
banks.
Then we
Absolutely
vote on the
none.
different suggestions electronically, and we can remove those we elect. We live in an era where digital technology has interlinked the entire planet. There is not a person in Britain who cannot have access to internet communication. And therefore we should move forward democratically, socially and technically to a higher level of society, higher level of participation, higher level of democracy, higher level of organisation and higher level of control over power as it's exercised in society.
That's the libertarian idea.
We need to have elected House of Lords.
So he's no longer a commie, he's now a libertarian.
You can't have this in the 21st century.
But he was a commie before. I'm not sure if he's changed.
The House of Lords need to be elected, so the people can decide who's in government.
Yeah.
I think that's best for everyone.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what they do, to be honest.
Even if you're right wing, left wing, it doesn't matter.
They influence.
Or should be determined by its people.
Any law that's passed.
So can you have hope in the nature of the people of Britain? Most people in Britain are perfectly affable, pleasant people.
So they represent me and you.
Do you need to be scared of them? No. Are they going to beat you up? No. Are they going to rob you? No.
I mean,
but the
it's fair
system
enough.
of society that rules over Britain and rules over the world
They can work against me.
Yeah,
is
they
a
are.
we
barbarous
have no
system
say
that eats
in
and
what they do.
consumes
And that's
human
the
beings
What I
as
don't
they
like about
live.
representative
It
democracy
keeps you alive
is we
so
make
they can
one
squeeze
decision
wealth
once
out of
every
you.
5 years.
So they can plunder you and rob you.
Regardless how our society
And when you
have
reach
more of a libertarian
95
system.
years of age and are on the edge of dying, when you die they put it, what's your name? Shay what?
Subscribe to an education
Shay Danawa, they put it on your
have a
grave.
lot more
Shay
control.
Danawa,
all the
our
time
IP
over how
killed by rent,
countries
interest and
work.
profit.
So-
That's what
so
the
that's
reality is.
capitalist,
In
libertarian
any case, I've been
system.
speaking for a while. It's a shitty day for speaking at Speakers Corner.
But
One question.
I really enjoy
Contribution.
what you're saying. My name is David, father of Shai.
Okay.
And the question I want to put forward is, isn't it just like a soul game? Actually, hierarchy, people who leave will always really make the situation and the conditions of life as it always was, meaning 1% and the rest 99%.
Well, I would agree with you, except for the fact that it's not how it always was.
wasn't it?
Society, wealth in society and power in society has become more and more concentrated in modern times. For example, when Zuckerberg ran into problems about Cambridge Analytica last year, he was planning to stand for President of America. He had a campaign going to visit 52 states of America in order to campaign for election as president. There is a person with the electronic connections to mobilize the population and manipulate them to serve their needs.
Is that a different from King Arthur?
Yes, because they didn't have that connection.
But did they
If
need something
If
else?
King Arthur didn't wear his clothes and went in the population, no one knew who he was. No one could recognize his face, nor could he recognize it. There was no database, no knowledge about who actually existed, apart from simple local
Wasn't he the
church registers.
1% who took advantage of the rest of the 99%?
Well, yes, it is true that for most modern times, there have been a minority who accumulated the wealth. And that was because, according to Marx, if you look at what he was writing about these questions, it's a very simple reason. It's because there was more than what the community required, but there was not enough to share the surplus produced by the people. So therefore, some people were going to accumulate that surplus, and the power and position and authority and mystique associated with that. And so in ancient tribes, when we could produce more than we required, it was no longer shared. Someone became the chief, someone became the guru, someone became the magician. But that only exists
From the first
for a
empire,
tiny
there was much
proportion
wealth
of human
inequality.
history. A tiny proportion of human history. 95% or 97% of human history did not have a surplus. And
Well, we were a
therefore- and
hunter-gatherer
therefore,
species.
There were some times we were hunter-gatherers. There were some times we had
Before
fixed
agricultural
communities.
revolution, we were
We
hunter-gatherers.
also, in agriculture, we also had times where we didn't have a significant surplus.
Yeah.
The surplus emerged at different times in different places. And according to Marx, and I agree he's probably correct in terms of his history in this, for most of human history, people lived in what he called primitive communism. There was no private
Well,
property.
there was
to
no
speak
money,
of.
but then there was no
Oh, it's
dawning
new.
of human consciousness
What's that
until
about?
70,000 years
What's that
ago.
about today?
What are you talking about?
Very strange.
And also there was no industries back then as well.
Thank you so much for taking the time to give your ideas out. Alas, I doubt that even though there was no surplus, I could agree with that idea. But even there was no surplus, there was always somebody manage the group.
Okay, that's another question. That's more of a psychodynamics of mass and of communities. And there have been many attempts to answer these questions. I won't give you a definitive answer because I don't have one. But there have been attempts, and I think they're worth studying, to analyse how, historically, we have intervened, both with things like democracy, with the right of removal, with judicial mechanisms, with anti-corruption mechanisms and so on, in order to contain these things. So, for example, there was a guy by the name of Charles Fourier, and he proposed something what he called philastries. The philastria had something like, I don't know the exact numbers, 1,300 people. And he figured that this was the right number, mixed together between different ages and different groups, to create a community of harmony. Now, he didn't achieve his objective, he attempted to, he didn't achieve it, but such experimentation, historically, has produced results, not just negative results.
you probably know of, kibbutz in Israel,
I was thinking about it.
or democratic election of committees, of workers' committees in Yugoslavia, or election of committees that were created in the Russian Revolution, or the same thing in the Hungarian Revolution, 1956, or even movements that developed similar to that in the period 1989 to 1991 in Eastern Europe, when the regime was collapsing and people were trying to figure out where they are going, what's going on. Some people have attempted to compare the Brexit vote with the fall of the Berlin Wall. I think that's nonsense. Absolute nonsense. But in terms of the psychology of the people, in relation to their belief in power, to their faith in administration, and of the representation of them in politics, it has created a gridlock that has opened up the possibility that the people can join in participating. The problem is that many people, in fact most people, had been hoodwinked into believing that they have participated. That crossing a piece of paper in 2016 on leave or join or remain in the European Union somehow gave them some power. It did not. It did not make any difference to your
It was
position
meant to be
of
an
power.
attempt at direct democracy.
It was an attempt at direct democracy.
Well, it was a
wasn't
single decision.
It was a referendum
in
decision.
direct
a referendum
democracy
does not itself create direct democracy.
Well, you need a lot more decisions to actually have direct democracy.
If you decide the question, that's why a constituent assembly would be the resolution to this.
Right.
Because then we put the question, and then we answer that question.
I think a libertarian subscription system would be better.
A referendum, Brexit or not Brexit, is not a participatory decision. We did not put the question. The question was put by Nigel Farage and David Cameron, not by us. And the next people's vote will also not be put by us. It will be put by a few politicians in Parliament, if anybody. So it's a delusion to believe that's mass participation. That's passivity. Go cross a piece of paper.
The
How
problem
long does
is
that take? 1
representative
minute?
democracy.
2 minutes? 30 seconds? That's it. I've already been speaking for an hour. Time to stop. Next time. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. See you another time.
Can I have a picture with you? Can I have a picture with you?
Come take over everything from your melody.
Come, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
But how can we? How have we found the IQG? So you tell me we found the IQG. So, like, what are you talking about?
Okay, so let me try to understand what you explain. So IQ is a metric, right? It's actually what's called a G-loaded factor test. What it's doing is it's trying to say, what we loosely call in culture intelligence, can I find a series of tests for which any behavior can be put in and all other behaviors can be factored out? There are only 14 such factors